Hello everybody and welcome back to Picked at Dawn's YouTube channel. It's now the end of February and we're going to start sowing some seeds because in North Yorkshire we've now reached 10 hours of daylight, which is fabulous, and today, rather excitingly, it's actually sunlight as well. The sun has shone, so I thought today's video would be a perfect way to introduce you to starting some seeds. As you can see behind me there, I have already got little plants on the go, but don't worry, you've not missed out, you're not too late. Those guys there were sown in September and October last year, so they've overwintered in the polytunnel. That's why they look quite big and chunky now. So don't worry, you're not behind with anything. Now's the time you want to start your seeds. The reason that we don't start seeds any earlier than this, which is mid to the end of Feb, is because there's just not enough daylight hours. A lot of seeds you can get to germinate without sunlight. Not all of them need sunlight. But what happens is, once the seed husk is cracked and the seed starts to grow, it will be looking for sunlight, daylight, sunlight. And that's what the plant needs to grow, basically. So if you remember back to all your photosynthesis that you learnt at school in science, a plant needs sunlight. So what will happen is the seed husk will crack and then it'll produce a stem, and if we haven't got enough sunlight, it'll be going I'm sure that sounded a brilliant sound effect. Anyway, the stem comes up and the leaves are looking for the sunlight to photosynthesize, and if it can't find the sunlight, that's when you end up with those like gangly, wispy looking stems. Now those seedlings will probably be okay, but what we're really looking for is a nice chunky strong seedling. So we wait until there's enough sunlight to start our seeds. That is now. Saying that is now is only the right time to be sowing your hardy annuals. So what do I mean by hardy annuals? Basically, plants are broken up into different sections, if you like. So you've got the hardy annuals, which is what we're going to deal with today. They are what they say on the tin, basically. They're hardy, so it means that they can withstand cooler temperatures, and they're an annual, which means that they'll grow for 1 year, I'd drop their seed, and then that's them done, basically. Then you've got the half hardy annuals. Now those guys are the ones that are a bit more soft and delicate to colder temperatures, and they're the sort of like sunshine lovers. So things like zinnias and stuff like that you get later in the season, those can't withstand cold temperatures. They just don't like it whatsoever. So there's absolutely no point in us starting those seeds now, because here certainly our last frost date will be potentially, let's hope it's sooner rather than later, but it could be anything into the second week of May. And I'm not going to risk planting my half hardies outside, because all that time and effort that I've spent and that seed's spent in getting to that stage, and then I go and plant it outside and we have a frost and it dies, it's just not good, is it really? So what I'm going to stick to today is the hardy annuals. The other types of seed that you can sow now are biennials. Biennials are plants that will not flower in the first year that you sow them, and they will flower the following year. So things like foxgloves are biennial. So you will end up with a really chunky biennial plant if you're looking to sow it now, but it won't flower till next year. So don't get panic stricken if you're looking for flowers this year if you've sown a biennial, because it's just not going to happen. The other seeds that you can be sowing now are perennial varieties of seeds. A lot of perennials, this is the ideal time to sow them. A perennial is a plant that will germinate this year. Some of them will flower this year, not all of them, and then they will come back year in, year out. They do die back, a lot of them, to ground in the winter. That is the plant saving itself. It's looking after its best interests and keeping warm beneath the ground. So don't worry, things like lupins and delphiniums and stuff like that, they're all perennial. They do disappear over winter, but they will be back. Keep the faith. So I've chosen a nice selection of 5 of my top hardy annuals that you can get away with sowing now, and it'll give you a really nice selection of flowers to cut from during the summer. That I've chosen to sow today are in no particular order, as they say. Let's make it sound really exciting. Let's start with cornflower. We're going to sow some cornflower today. I've chosen to sow black ball purely because I use the black variety more in my work than the blue variety, but all cornflowers, whichever one takes your fancy, you can sow now. They're a brilliant starter flower, really easy to germinate, and a great one for beginners of cut flowers. Next one is a completely different flower to cornflower because it is massive, is malope. Now malope flowers, I'm going to be doing sowing a mixed variety of malope today. So we're going to be looking at getting flowers from white, light pink, mid pink, right through to a beautiful, beautiful sort of like wine burgundy pink colour. And those guys will be flowering at the beginning of July. The next one is snapdragons, or antirrhinum to give them their posh name. I'm sowing antirrhinums today because they're a really, really nice spike for your floral arrangements. The good thing to do is sow a mixture of flowers so that when you put them into a vase together, you have like lots of different textures and sizes and things going on to create interest. So the spike that we're going to sow today is snapdragon, and we're going to be sowing Potomac lavender. It's not actually lavender when it flowers, it's sort of like a dirty pink, and I quite like it. Then we need a bit of filler. So the next flower we're going to sow today is ammi majus. Now I describe ammi majus as like posh cow parsley, if you can imagine that. It's brilliant for volume in your bouquets and adding air going through your designs. It grows really strongly, and it is another great easy flower to grow. So that's the next one on our list. Now, this is the flower that I was saying isn't actually a hardy annual. It's a half hardy, stroke hardy. So that just means it's like somewhere in the middle of the two. But the reason we're going to sow this flower today is because it takes a long time for it to reach maturity. So it takes a long time to develop the plant to produce the flower, and it flowers at the back end of the year. So we're really, really getting a head start with this now. And the next variety that we're going to be sowing is an annual aster. Like I say, asters flower at the end of the year, so this should give you some flowers at the back end when things like your cornflowers and stuff are starting to finish. Asters last really, really well in a vase. You'd be looking at sort of like 10 days vase life out of them if they're picked and conditioned correctly. So they're my seeds that we're going to get sowing today. So every single seed has got a little bit of a different technique with it, and I'm going to show you those techniques now. Okay, let's get sowing. With every seed that you sow, the principle at the beginning is the same for everything. You need whatever it is you're sowing into to be clean. So if you're sowing into a pot, then you need to clean it out from what used to be in it. And or if you're sowing into a plug tray, you need to give it a good wash, because what happens, in a word of warning, is if these have been stacked up over winter, or even just for a day sometimes, slugs like to get under here, and all sorts of other little nasties which could do damage to your seedlings. So give everything a good wash before you start to sow into it. Now you do have options as to what you can sow into. Not every seed will be happy in every situation. Some seeds that say on the packet sow directly where they are to flower. What that seed packet is trying to tell you is that those seeds that are in there don't like root disturbance. So if you are going to sow those, then those are the seeds that you need to sow into cell trays, or you need to directly sow them and then thin through the seedlings. Any other seeds you can get away with sowing into either pots if you're short on space that you have bought plants into. Just give them a really good wash, like I say, first, or you can sow into cell trays. I sow into cell trays the majority of the time here, because this here is the tray size that my plants go directly into the field from. It's a 54 cell tray, and the holes are approximately 3 centimetres by 3 centimetres, and that's the size of the root system that you'll develop before you plant it into the field. But you can sow into pots like that. So there's some snapdragons that have been sown into that pot, and what I have to do with those now is I have to prick them out, give them their own little individual cell to grow into and develop into. You can't leave them in that pot to grow and then plant them straight out into your field, because they just won't have developed a good enough singular root system for each plant. So you have options as to what you can sow into. Today we're going to be sowing into the cell tray, so let's make a start with some cornflower. So like I've already mentioned, make sure all your trays and pots, whatever you're going to sow into, is nice and clean. Then you want to fill them with compost. I'm going to be using Silver Grow Melcourt compost, which is a peat-free compost, and it has got coir in it. What I've done is taken a 50 litre bag of that compost, and then I mix 1 litre of 6X into it. 6X is an organic fertiliser made of composted chicken manure, and it's a really fine dusty fertiliser, and I just make sure that I mix it in. So that's a 1 litre to 50 litre mix that I use in there. So there we go, just filling the trays ready for the cornflower to get sown into. So I fill right to the top, so it's more or less brimming over the top of the tray, because what you'll find is that there'll be air pockets and stuff in there, and it'll sink down. When you water, I pre-water all of my trays, no matter what seed it is that I'm sowing, because it gives the seed something to cling to. I don't have the facilities to underwater or let each tray absorb water here, because there's just so many of the trays. But you can basal water, which means that the plant will suck water up from beneath, but you need a water retaining tray beneath whatever it is you're sowing into to be able to do that. So I pre-water here and then sow the seed and give it a little sprinkling over the top. Whatever you're watering after you've put seeds into the compost, you need to make sure that you're using a fine rose if you're overhead watering, because otherwise you'll wash the seed straight off the surface and you'll lose all those seeds. So that's had some water now, and then what I do is I create a little well for the seed to sit in by poking my fingers into the tray. Nothing technical. And I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but there's a little well for me to sow the seed into. Probably had a lovely view at the top of my head there. Now dry off my hands on the back of my trousers, because that's what I do, sorry. And that is some cornflower seed. They look like little ends of paintbrushes, I always think. Now cornflower seed's big enough for me to be able to see it. I can even see it without my glasses on. So it's a fairly average sized seed. It's not one of the little tiny seeds like the snapdragons, which I'll show you how we deal with those in a minute. So I can manage to pick up the seeds here, and I'm going to put 2 into each cell. Right, they're all sown now into the seed tray. I'm going to introduce you to a product that I use on all of the seeds that I sow. This is vermiculite. Vermiculite's like that golden sort of sand. They're like tiny little sponges. They act on the top surface of the seed tray, so that if you accidentally overwater your seeds, these little particles here will absorb some of the moisture, and it won't prevent damping off, but it'll do its best to alleviate any damping off issues. Damping off is where water gathers around the top of the seed tray, and it can make the seedlings basically flop and die. So if you're accidentally standing there with your hose pipe watering your seed trays and you get a bit distracted like I do and put too much water on one of your seed trays, then the beauty of having the vermiculite on top of it is that it will absorb that excess water. Not to be confused with perlite. Perlite's the other product that it'll be on the shelf next to vermiculite in the garden centre, just there to confuse you. Perlite is the little white, they look like tiny little stones, and that is a different product that you mix in with your compost or soil, and what that does is it creates aeration. You don't use perlite when sowing seeds. Perlite is something used for a more mature plant when you're potting it on, so just not to confuse the two. Like I say, I use vermiculite on all of my seedlings. I use it in slightly different ways depending on if the seed is a seed that needs to be buried under the surface or a seed that needs sunlight. Now, cornflowers can be slightly buried, so what I've done, a bit of a Blue Peter moment there, is I have mixed 50-50 vermiculite and compost into that pot there, and then I'm just going to sprinkle it onto the top to make it level with the top of my seed tray. When I poked my fingers into the seed tray earlier, I knew the depth that I was poking them is the right depth for a cornflower to be sown. So that's it, cornflower's done. Next on our list of my top 5 seeds to sow at the minute is malope. They are malope seeds, and they're sown exactly the same way as we sown the cornflowers. Ta-da! Malope. So next up on our list of seeds to sow at this time of year is antirrhinum or snapdragon. They are absolutely tiny, tiny little seeds. One thing you may decide to do is sow them onto the surface of a pot, which means that you don't have to try and sow into individual cells with individual seeds, and then you can prick them out and pot them on when they're a bit bigger and you can see what you're handling. That's something that we'll look at doing in another video probably. But if you are like me and are going to try and sow them into individual cell trays, then probably a good thing that I should have done is remember to bring my glasses with me today. But a technique that I use is tip the seeds into a folded piece of cardboard or paper, and then you use something heavy like a pencil to knock them into the seed tray, and what happens is they'll fall slightly slower from that little gully, and then you should be able to see which ones are going in. Another technique that you can use is with the end of a damp pencil. It doesn't have to be a Star Wars pencil, by the way, or a cocktail stick, is you use that, and if it's damp, the seed sticks to the end, and then you drop each individual seed into the cell tray. So I'll show you a couple of those techniques now. as you can see, you have to be quite delicate and you have to have time on your hands to be able to do it this way. That's technique number one. The other technique is damp the end of your pencil or cocktail stick. I can't do this very well today because I haven't got my glasses on. And then when it's damp, the seeds will stick to the end of your pencil. I can't remember where I was up to now. There. And then you drop them into the tray, just wiping them off on the surface of the compost. It takes a long time antirrhinum sowing, but it's worth it, believe me. Now, because snapdragons are absolutely tiny seed, what we don't want to do is bury them because they do need light to germinate. So that is where we just use the vermiculite over the top, a light sprinkling of this, because I'll try and say light a few more times, shall I? Because vermiculite allows light through. And our next one is ammi majus. They're ammi majus seeds there, marginally bigger than antirrhinum seeds, but it's still a seed that I'm going to use the knocking in off my cardboard technique with, because my fingers are far too clumsy to be trying to pick up tiny little seeds like that and sow individually. Now, ammi is another seed that we don't block the light with, so we're going to use vermiculite again. That's it. Ammi, done. And last, but by no means least, and it will be the last one to flower of the little selection that we've sown today, we have got annual aster seeds there. And you can see I've got them in my hand, slightly bigger. I'm going to go for it with my fingers with these guys and sow them in individual cell trays. We are sowing these now, like I say, which will seem incredibly early just because they take a long time to develop. This is an annual aster, by the way, not the perennial aster. So this one is from the Tower series, and this one is Tower Chamois, I think it's pronounced. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I can tell you it's really pretty. And the aster are another one that says surface sow. So surface sow meaning we don't block the light, so it's another vermiculite job. There we go, our 5 top seeds to be sowing at this time of year, all sown. Remember to put a label into each of the trays or pots that you've sown into. I put the name of the seed that I've put in there, and I also put the date on the back, so I know when to expect signs of germination. Remember, now is the time to give them another drink. Give them a drink either from the base and let them absorb some water, or with a fine rose over the top. And then it's just a waiting game. You'll probably do exactly what I do every single morning. Walk into your greenhouse or polytunnel, or check your window ledges, wherever you're growing them, with a cup of tea, expecting to see signs of germination. I still do that, even though I know these seeds are going to take 2 weeks until we see something really. Maybe the cornflower will probably see something a bit earlier. If this sunshine holds up, hopefully it will. These are in the polytunnel, so they have got a bit of weather protection, but they're not heated at all. These seeds will germinate quite happily in these sorts of temperatures. Around about 12 degrees is fine for these to start germinating. So that is it for now. We've just got to wait for them to germinate, and then in about 4 weeks to 6 weeks time, we'll be thinking about planting them outside, and we will be expecting flowers from these beautiful seeds in about July. Yeah, July. Just checking in my own head there. But yeah, expect to see some flowers from these in July. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed my top 5 seeds to be sowing at this time of year, and I'll catch you next time when hopefully we'll do a farm tour.